Stone, and I'm Ray Mofield, and we're visiting in the home of John Riley. We're on his own road. In fact, there's a sign that says John Riley Road. And when you come to his house here in Benton, you're sort of at the end of the way. It's a wonderful place out here, Mr. Riley, and I appreciate you letting me come to visit you. Would you tell me how long you've been here?
Well, I've been here 80 years old. I'll be 81 the 23rd day of February. And so I was born here. Still live at the place where I was born at. Been here all my life. And don't want to live nowhere else over here.
So you're satisfied with Marshall County?
I'm satisfied with Marshall County.
Mm-hmm. Well, I saw the bed just a moment ago. I'll interject that for the listeners, on which Mr. Riley was born.
That's right. I was born on that bed. Yeah.
Well, tell us who your mother and father were.
Well, my father was Bill Riley. They called him Bill. Williams is his name, of course, and they called him Bill. He's come here from, well, really, when they come to this country, they come from North Carolina. All of them did. And he come here and lived at Golo, where the three counties joined, Marshall, Graves, and Callaway.
Mm-hmm.
So two of the boys decided they wanted to come to Benton and buy a farm they heard of. And they come and they bought it. Of course, he didn't want to leave where he was raised at and where he'd been so long. But he finally decided to come. They come and bought the farm I'm living on now. And they bought it from a fellow at Benton. It was named Bud Cross. They called him, he printed the Benton paper. Of course, there was two buds in Benton.
Mm-hmm.
And they called one red bud and one was the black bud.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm still here. Of course, he come from North Carolina, all of them did. The Rileys.
Riley, I believe, is an Irish name.
Right, that's right.
And your mother was whom?
She was a Mills. She was Arch Mills' daughter. And
do you happen to remember any of your grandparents? Can you remember?
yeah, I don't remember them. No, I don't remember my grandparents. Never seen them. She was Martha Mills, Arch Mills, and Julina P. She was my grandmother was a P, Julina P. And William Riley, that's my granddad, Riley granddad, was William Riley, and Lucy Newsom was my grandmother. Of course, I don't remember them, but that's who they was. And they come from North Carolina, and when Arch Mills, he stopped at Boone Station, Kentucky, where he was a gunsmith.
Now that goes back to the very beginnings of Kentucky.
Right. So he finally settled and then come to Golo.
Mm-hmm.
So that's about as far as I can go with my grandparents and my parents. Of course, I had you want me to tell my brothers and sisters?
Oh, that'll be fine. Sure.
I had his brother named T.T. Riley. He was a preacher. And H.A. Riley, he was next to him, next to oldest Riley, boy. I'll name the boys first. And then there's R.C. Riley. Of course, he's well known, R.C. Riley was in Benton. And D.F. Riley, that was Dallas Riley. They called him Dow in Benton, all of them. Then Dewey Riley, he's still living. He's one of my brothers, the only one that's living. And then I reckon I've got all the boys now. But
There were some girls then.
yeah. Of course, I was the youngest boy. I was 7. No, I've got a little brother, dead. He's buried in the Riley Cemetery at Golo.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a boy. Of course, I'm the youngest one. I'm the 7th son. And
The 7th son, that should have made you a prophet.
yeah. Yeah, but he was the 7th son can do things that is.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, the girls now, the oldest one was Mary Bearden. She married Martha Salisbury Bearden, and he was a surveyor of Marshall County. He's done a lot of surveying in Marshall County. And she had 2 children and 4 children. Clint Bearden, Elder Man Cole, and Martha Bearden, and Stanley Bearden. So, the next one was Veda Sars. She's lived over here by Church Grove a long time. She's been dead quite a while, and she had 2 children, Mildred and Ernestine. And I had one named Lola Turner. She had 2 boys, Edward and Riley Turner, and Earline Turner was the girl. I reckon them was all the children she had.
You had a large family then.
Yeah. And I had one named Denny, a sister. She never was married.
Now, when you were born, was your dad farming?
Yeah.
So you grew up then to work on the farm.
That's right. Till 1940, I reckon it was. I was called to Kentucky Dam. I went to work at Kentucky Dam, and I worked there. I don't know just how long, a good long while. And then when I left there, of course, I was running a grout pump at Kentucky Dam, and I run 1,400 bags in one shift in the ground.
Trying to stop up water seep holes and so on.
And the next guy come on, run that many. They just went on through, and the next one come on, they sealed it off.
It was time to quit that bottomless pit.
Well, I'll just tell, it'll take me forever to tell those.
Yeah.
So I went to work, when I left there, I went to work at State, I reckon. I worked State and worked there all through the, think of that guy's name, he was governor. Anyway, I worked there with your wife, or daddy. And the next job I had, I worked for United Engineers. I worked there for 2 years or better, I guess. So I reckon that's about all the place I worked. I don't know. I can't remember nowhere else.
Where did you go to school, Mr. Riley?
Cherry Grove Schoolhouse, a little frame house that sat right over on the Mayfield Highway.
Cherry Grove.
Cherry Grove.
Well, I don't believe I'd heard that.
I doubt if you had. And it used to set down here on my land. Of course, it was moved from down there on further up. I don't know. No old man, Mr. Bond, Ashley Bond, told my older brothers and pop that that's where it was. It's still a sign where the well was there, you know. And how
Yes, sir.
Well, it went on through there and built this one over here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a racetrack that went through there, you know. Went right through this point here and towards that schoolhouse.
A racetrack?
Yeah, they had race horses back then, and they had races back in there, and of course, that's...
So the racetrack they built at Paducah this year wasn't the first one we'd had in western Kentucky.
No. Of course, I don't guess it's like they are now, hardly. They had things back then that's different from what they are now. Of course, the schoolhouse, the old Cherry Grove Schoolhouse, I don't know where you know where Jeremiah lives, or...
I know about that area, yes.
Well, it's just below, as you go down that hill on the left, as you go where they're building that new road, you're going toward the Bayfield.
Yes, the Benton bypass.
Yeah. And to the left, if you're going to Mayfield, it's right on that hill, just before you go down.
Do you remember any of your teachers?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of them I'll start in about as far, of course, my brother, Harv Riley, was a teacher, and he there. I went to him. That was back early. And I remember Effie Blade was a teacher when I, just small. Sometimes they have to bring me home or something when it started. And another two is Florence Grubbs is one. You might know her. You knew any of the Grubbs. She's from up there between Burrs and Hardin. Maud Grubbs is one. And then Roscoe Holmes was one.
Well, you brought up some names that I don't believe I'd heard very often. Several of them.
No, it's been too long for you to remember yet. And Only Dunn, do you know Joe Dunn's sister?
Oh, yes.
I went to her.
Well, that's fine. Now, you attended that school, and could you tell us a little bit what those schools were like?
Well, they're a lot different from what they are today. You know, teachers then, they didn't have them study like hard like they do today. And
Well, they had quite a few to see. There was one teacher for all the grades.
That's right. They couldn't matter, as you say, I don't guess.
They simply didn't have the time, did they?
No. So, they, well, I don't know. They just didn't make good grades back then. Don't seem to me like they do now. And get out of school,
Well, you've told us a bit about your career. Could you tell us something about your own family, when you married and so forth?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had a dad. My dad was down in the bed, sick for about 4 years. Helpless. Of course, I was the youngest one, not married, and I had to stay here and help my mother take care of him, see? And
there were no such things as hospitals in Marshall County then.
No, and the doctors, they'd come to your home, and look at them and give them medicine. And
Incidentally, I enjoyed that pill bottle you showed me a moment ago, the Dr. Washburn's pill bottle.
Well,
that'd hold enough to run a family for a year, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, naturally, it wasn't full of pills when he brought it. I don't know, I think I was at the office of getting medicine one time. Up there, I don't know what it's for, nothing much, I don't guess. And he gave me that bottle.
He'd emptied up one,
Uh-huh.
of course, yeah.
And so, my mother was down, I guess she was down about 6 or 7 years helpless in the bed. Had a stroke and couldn't even talk.
And you cared for her.
That's right, her, me and my sister. I've got a sister that's over here living now. I didn't tell you about her a while ago. She's in the rest home over here. She's 91, I think it is, 91 year old. So, then I had another sister. After that 7 years, got down and stayed in the bed for about 3 or 4 years. Of course, my wife was here then. I was done and married, and she could help me out.
Now, who was your wife?
She was a Bogard. Yeah, Maydale Bogard. She's where their people lived in Murray. She was born in Iowa, my wife was. Her daddy was a Noah Bogard. And she had a brother named Bud Bogard. I don't know, you may know some of the Bogards, I don't know. There's a bunch of them. And, of course...
Now, did you and your wife have any children?
Yeah. I've got my oldest girl, Johnny Faye Davis. She's got 3 children, 3 grandchildren. Adam's the boy's name. Amanda's the girl's name, and then the youngest one's named John. And her husband's named Joe Davis. And I've got a boy that works at IGA's over here, William Clay Riley. You probably know him. I don't know if you're over there much.
Mm-hmm.
Works at that grocery. And he married he's married, he lives up here on the Slickback. Delia Morris.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any children. Then I've got Mark and Luke, the twin boys. They work in Paducah, Reynolds and Burl Cabinet Factory.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they live here with me now.
Yes, sir. Well, before we run out of time, and of course we still have about 10 minutes left, but I want to get you to tell me some things about Benton as you remember it back in the earlier days. Now,
Well, I commenced, I reckon,
did you tell me there was a hotel where the National Store is?
that's right. They had a hotel there, and of course there wasn't no lights, electric lights, you know, then.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know just what year electricity come to Benton. And they had outhouses, you know, around.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about.
Of course.
And, of course, there was 2, at this hotel, they had a bus, they called it, by cans pulled by horses, 2 little gray horses.
And did that go to the train station?
That's right. They had a train come through, I believe it was Doodlebug, they called it, went through about 12 o'clock. To Paducah, from Hardin on to Paducah. And they'd go down there and get what they wanted, and come back on the 1 o'clock train and go in the courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, they had the 3 o'clock train, went to Paducah. And I think as one come back, went through Murray and Hardin later in 5 or something. Seems like, I don't know. Anyhow, this bus would pick up people there, It was busy all the time. And the fellow that drove it, his name was Carson Hames. They'd go down there, and there's livery stables stuff right across the Church Cross, just north of Church Cross. They kept horses all the time in it, and sold rice down there. And they'd turn, make a turn, and go up in that hotel, and let the people off,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was a lot different. It was a different building sort of than what it is now.
I guess the drummers and the salesmen would come in on the train and ride up to the livery stable and rent a horse and buggy, maybe.
Yeah, they had horses to rent. There was 2 livery stables there. That was Will Cole's there in front of it, just across the street from the Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And down right where Philip Chevrolet's at was another livery stable. That was Tom. Yeah, Tom. Well, he had a brother named Squinch Bond and Tom Bond. They run that one. Mm-hmm. They run that livery stable. And of course, there's another place over there right where the Philbeck and Can funeral home's at. But still they had a building full of mules every fall, and set up to people, plow with and such as that. Great big building, long back down there. There wasn't very many buildings on that side of the block, even 2 more, I think. Of course, the Tribune was printed right down there where the Bank of Marshall County's at. There was a building, little building, wooden building where the printed it in. And
now you're the first one that I ever heard say that the Tribune was printed there.
Well, it was printed in another place too.
Later years
when the town got better.
But I believe you're going back farther than anybody I've ever.
Anybody I've ever heard hadn't say anything about that. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of other things I'd like to think of and tell, but I can't think fast. Of course, Bank of Benton used to be about middle ways of the street there, about
on the west side of the courthouse.
On the west side, and the Marshall County was right on the end as you go down to the church there.
Mm-hmm.
That's Bank of Marshall County. And Riley and Hauser had a grocery there. Riley and Wolf had a grocery, and Riley and Hauser had a clothing store there. And Straw Brothers had a clothing store right there. Right there where as you go up the hill there, and I can't think of the place. Straw Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Nelson Drug Store, right where it's been a long time. But
now that goes way back then, the Nelson Drug Store.
Yeah. And the Griffey.
Was that Arch Nelson?
Arch Nelson run that drug store there. Of course, Pont, his boy, run it after Arch died,
Mm-hmm.
So there's one named McElrath down there. His McElrath store. And Dr. Stidley used to have a drugstore right on the corner there, on the south end of the block. And they didn't have no electric lights in Benton back when I was a kid. And the streets was muddy sometimes, all except that main street had the gravel on it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course the sidewalks was laid with blocks, brick flats.
Mm-hmm.
Big bricks.
I tell you, town has certainly changed a lot.
Oh, it's changed. Back I don't know, when I went a mile and a half right through here, just like crow flies to Benton. Go through there and go to Mayo, and of course we raised all the wheat and the corn, raised everything we eat, in the meat. We go down there to Johnson's Mill, which is down there about where somewhere where the co-op store's at, along there back this way.
Yes, sir.
And there wasn't no stock law at all then. And the old cows would ride up on the wagon and try to pull your corn off.
You went along, they'd get a bite.
And of course, there was no stock law, and they'd come out through here and get the bad stuff, you know, cornfields and things. I had to keep them run out. He finally built them a fence around this field, you know.
You were almost forced to, weren't you?
I don't remember just when they voted stock law out. I mean, yeah.
Mr. Riley, were you a fiddler?
Yeah.
Somebody told me that you played the violin.
Yeah, I play. I've got about 7 different fiddles here. Oh, my whole bunch plays.
Did you ever play for a square dance?
Yeah. Yeah, I played for square dances and around a lot of places.
What were some of the tunes they'd ask you for?
Oh, they with square dances, they like old breakdowns like 8th of January and Arkansas Traveler and fast tunes, you know. Of course, I play waltzes too.
Yeah. Over the Waves?
Yeah.
That's always a good one. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty good.
Well, that's fine. You've given a description of Benton that, as I said, I'd never heard. Most of the ones I've heard have been more recent, of course, than what you were telling there. Well, we only have about 2 more minutes left. Now, do you have anything in mind that you especially want to tell us about before we go off?
I don't reckon I do, really. I don't know. Of course, I could talk to you all day as to that matter if I could think fast enough.
Well, what about some of the county officials or anything? Did you ever run for office?
No, I never did run for office.
But now some of the Rileys did.
Well, Harv Riley did.
Wasn't he city judge?
Oh, he was city judge there for 4 terms, I think. And he run for sheriff, and again, Harry Miller almost beat him. He didn't like too many votes. I don't reckon any of the rest of them ever run for anything, Riley. Of course, the Rileys is all Republicans nearly, you know.
And there not being nearly as many Republicans registered in the county, they had a...
Republicans is all registered Democrats now.
Yeah. You mean there are such things as closet Republicans,
yeah.
then? They talk about from time to time.
Yeah.
Well, what about your first radio? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I've got it here. I know I was sitting listening at it one night, and they bombed Pearl Harbor. I was sitting and listening right the night they done it. They got kind of busy.
That's right. We really had. I can remember that pretty well myself.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Riley, I certainly thank you for the interview that you've given us, and we're glad to get it on tape and have it at the library in Benton, and of course to play it on WCBL, and we'll also see that a copy goes to the State Archives in Frankfort so we can remember all those things you told us about this county.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming. I'm glad to tell you what I know. Of course, I've forgotten more than I know now.
Well, you must have known an awful lot because you've given us a very fine interview.
I think I left out some of the children, my brother's children up here I didn't put on it. I just do his children was Emily and Martha and Charles William and Mary Elizabeth was all his children. I believe I left them out, and I was telling you about the other children they had. I don't know, but then I hate to leave anything out about it.
Well, I know you do, but thanks a million, and we return you now to our studios.